and deal with the real and relevant topics that impact the everyday lives of the African American community through frank and insightful dialogue with local and national influencers. Every day, there's another horrible story in the news program, directly or indirectly impacting African Americans. So we need to look at the shining stars in the galaxy of Black America. It is time to tell our story.
Good evening, good evening, good evening, and welcome to another Did You Know? I'm going to change the script a little bit this evening because most of you know I have something to say for 10 minutes before I usually bring my guest on. But I think I have some crisis tonight that we want to talk about, so I won't do 10 minutes of what I think I want to get off my chest. But I want to say a couple things, though. Black on crime is killing us, and we're killing ourselves. And we need to take a long, long look at that. You know, I was reading something the other day, and some of the things we don't think about. I was reading an article where in Philadelphia, there's a lot of wall markets, and they're moving out of the community because of crime. If they're moving out of the community because of crime, ladies and gentlemen, where are we going to go to store it? I'm just asking, where are we going to go? So that means we got to get on a bus and drive. If you don't have a car, you got to get on a bus, or you got to get some other transportation, or you got to pay Uber to bring you something. Is that fair to our community? I don't think it is fair. And we need to think about that. So as we walk around and act like, oh, I just want you to think about it. So I said, this program is Did You Know? I want you to think about that. The other thing I want you to think about, is it fair that people can't go to a movie theater? Is it fair they can't go to a grocery store? Is it fair they can't sit on their porch because afraid of violence, afraid they're going to get shot? We have come to that, ladies and gentlemen. We have come to that. And we have to let everyone know that we don't allow it, we don't tolerate it, and we don't appreciate it. Because I get upset so many times when I hear people act like we live in a community that we're all happy with a lot of things that go around us. And we're not. And I think that we're going to have to start speaking up about it. I think we're going to have to deal with it. Unfortunately, ladies and gentlemen, we are going to have to deal with it because it's our community. And I'll close with this one. Schools. Kids fighting in school. Scared to go to school. Now, who do you think that affects? So if we're not learning in school because we're scared to go to school, or we're in school and we think it's going to be a rumble, I'm just asking a question because this program is called Did You Know? What happens to the students in the school? So if they can't read and write, or if they can't do certain things, who's it affect? It affects you and I, because they may not be able to get a job. Even though we talk a lot about the industrial complex and we talk about the prison pipeline, we're helping and we're encouraging the prison pipeline. And so I just want you to think about those things. And not only I want you to think about those things, but I hope that you can come up with some solutions. I don't know, talk to our community leaders. Talk to our elected officials. Talk to the ministers. Talk to everyone. We got to do something. We're in a crisis. And this crisis is affecting us more than you think. So I'm going to leave you with this tonight. If grandma, grandpa, or your son or your nephew can't run up to the corner store to get that quarter of milk, a loaf of bread, who does it impact more? That's all I'm going to say. I'm not going to say no more than that. Okay. I think this election is so critical. I want to spend all my time on that this evening. And as you know, I put up earlier, the vote is precious. It is the most powerful nonviolent tool we have in a democracy society, and we must use it. And that was John Lewis. So I decided that I was going to bring two people on that I felt very comfortable about that has something to say about it. Now, most of you know Tony Ross because I have him on when I'm not on, but he's always here anyway. You know, he's a political person that knows what's going on. But I decided tonight that I was going to bring on, and most of you know I have brought him on before, John Baer. Most of you know who he is. If those of you don't, he writes a political column, and he's been around a long time. And so I brought him on because I want to get his perspective on things. And it should be very interesting tonight. And audience, I'm going to be very honest with you tonight. I told Tony and myself, we're going to get down to the nitty gritty tonight. And we ain't planning to be nice. We're going to be candid. And we're going to go after John and hope he gives us his perspective because he has a perspective. And one thing about this program, I tell people all the time, this is a Black perspective. And I admit this is a Black perspective, but we need to have both sides. And fortunately, I've known John a long time. So I'm not going to go through this long introduction of John. I'm going to kick it off this way. While America is caught in the crisis of the pandemic, fires, floods, heat, drought, much this is just add on for so many of us who are already suffering from efforts, lack of food, health care, and little income. This is the time to remember that each of us represent a link to survive from the beginning of time, even though we might not know where we came from. But we can do so much more to determine where we go from here. Since politics is about who gets fed, we must make sure that we are at the table. We can only do that by participating in the process. And whether the level we find ourselves in for jobs, getting hired, being qualified, we should and will be affected whether we vote or not. So there you go, John. What do you think about what I just said?
Well, Richard, there isn't anything more important than voting. If you care about other people, if you care about democracy, if you want a city, state, or nation that is interested in something beyond yourself, voting is the only way to try to get there. Not saying you're going to get there if you vote, but there's a better chance that you get there if you vote. I've always argued that whenever I talk to students and they say, why should I vote? What does that have to do with me? I said, well, it depends upon the kind of person you want to be. If your sole interest is your interest, don't bother. But if you have any sense of community, if you have any sense of all of us are in this, all society suffers or gains by whatever happens in society, then you should participate in the democracy. And in fact, we don't really have a democracy. We have a democratic republic that's different. We have representatives of us. We don't run the show. The people we elect to run it run the show, but we have a say in who those people are. And it's a heavy burden. And it's on us to make ourselves informed. It's on us to vote, whether there are hindrances to that process or not, whether we have so many states with voter ID rules and regulations. You've got to overcome that. You've got to find a way to vote, no matter what the situation is, no matter what your status is, no matter what your personal condition is, because it's the only way that a democratic republic can work for everybody.
Before I bring Tony on, the upcoming November midterm election must be on all of our radar. Our quality of life for the next 2 years of our immediate future will depend on that, and what we do and what we don't do. But I'm going to put a little twist on that this evening. This is not the push for either political party. If you doubt, if you have a problem with the Democrats and the Republicans, then I guess you need to register as an independent. But being registered prepares you to vote. And you see, I don't want people to get confused in that. I'm not just flip the script. Democrats and Republicans, but if you don't want to be that all the time, you've got your independence. You can be independent because you can vote in the general election. And I'm telling you, if you don't like the Democrats, you don't want to be labeled, then be an independent, but you need to come out to vote, because coming out will determine our future, whether you participate or not. Tony, it's your turn to talk to our good friend, John Baer.
Sure, and I would agree with you, Richard, that voting is very important. It's the reason I always say, it's the reason why politicians do things. They do things, one, to get votes, or two, for people who don't vote against them. So I think that's a true statement. But I wanted to ask John, you made a point about we must overcome the different hindrances to voting. What do we do about election deniers, who refuse to accept the will of the voter? How do we do that? How do we get people who are not thinking about participating in the process because they hear that? What would you say to a person who might feel that way?
Tony, it's a great point, and it's a danger. I mean, election deniers are a danger because that undermines the entire process, and therefore the everything having to do with the democracy. So, I mean, and there's so many of them still after the 2020 election. So I think what you do is, I mean, you just make the mental case, the case that, look, there isn't any evidence that election was rigged or defrauded in any way. 65 judicial cases, including those overseen by Trump appointees. It is just a fantasy. It is just a lie. And you have to convince people that you can have faith in the electoral process. We never used to question the electoral process. I mean, people would faithfully go to the polls in every election and expect that the results would be tabulated fairly and equally. And I believe that for the vast majority of instances, they have been. Is there ever any fraud in an election? Of course, but not enough to change the outcome, especially in a statewide or a national race. And you just have to keep making that case, keep trying to tell the truth, keep trying to stack up all of the evidence against the proposition that that election was rigged, or that any prior election was rigged, and hope that you can get that message across, if not immediately, then over time.
I'm amazed that we're questioning the integrity of the election, and it all came down to areas, neighborhoods that have had a large African-American population. It's amazing to me that the world or this society all of a sudden figured out Black folks have become so sophisticated that we knew how to rig an election. Now, come on, you folks. That is amazes me. On one side, you say a lot of negative things about us, but on the other side, you turn around and say, you know what? Philadelphia, Pittsburgh, wherever, basically in minority community, y'all rigged the election up, when most of the time, you were the guys that controlled the election. We might have counted some ballots or some things of that. We didn't buy the machines. We don't have the connection with whether it's the Russians or some spaceship that came down and changed them. It just amazed at me that people give us that kind of credit. And folks, I'm telling you tonight, they give us that kind of credit. We ought to show them we're going to come out to vote, and we're going to put in who we want, and we're going to put in people who are going to look out for us. And maybe once we do that, then maybe they'll stop taking us for granted. John, what you got to say?
Well, Richard, I mean, I don't want to jump ahead and start talking about the Senate race until you're ready to, but I mean, there is, I think, a very good chance that the whole rigged election thing is going to pop up again in Pennsylvania in that race because of the way that the legislature and the governor have been unable to allow mail-in voting to be what it's supposed to be, which is you let people process those votes as they come in so that on election night, you don't have to go through the entire process of opening the envelopes, flattening the envelopes, putting them in the machine, verifying all of that. And it'll take days because there's still millions plus who are voting by mail. So I have, in my mind, I fear that we'll go late night on Tuesday, November the 8th with Dr. Oz ahead. And then we'll start counting Wednesday, Thursday, Friday, all the mail-in votes, and that'll show John Fetterman ahead. And then we'll have the whole sad story of a rigged election all over again. Not saying it's going to happen. I'm fearful it's a possibility.
Well, let me just say this. I've already thought that. There is no question in my mind that I've already, it's all the tea leaves have already lined up that they're going to call it a rigged and faked election. I mean, the Republicans have done enough in this state to prove that. And I hate to say this, in this coming election, I am sure that even the racists among us will exercise their vote, no question, intended to protect their power while they count. But we must use our vote as rigorous to protect our interests as well. And that's why I'm saying to anybody that can hear my voice, this midterm votes matter. This is very important, if nothing else, to show that we can stand up and we can fight. And we're not going to sit on the sidelines and just let people walk over us anymore. And people might not like what I say tonight, but I'm very clear about that. And, we're going to move on because we got a lot to talk about tonight. And we're going to talk about the U.S. Senate stuff because that's going to be the dicey conversation tonight. But before we go there, I'm going to move on to the governor's race at first. Now, we got two candidates. They're both very different. Very different. Now, I'm going to ask you this question, John. They are different. You know they're different. But how do you see the people who's going to make the decision see both of those candidates?
Well, I mean, the Republican Doug Mastriano obviously has a base, and it's a Trump base, and maybe a little bit further right than Trump's base. First time statewide candidate, barely a first-term senator, state senator. And Josh Shapiro on the other side, lifetime in politics, has done the old traditional climb through the system and not make many mistakes along the way. I mean, worked in the Congress right out of law school, served in the state house, served as a county commissioner in Montgomery County, twice elected attorney general. There was never any question that he would run for governor. There was never any question he would win the nomination. How many times, and I think we talked about this on one of your shows before, Richard, how many times have you seen a Democratic candidate for an open seat for anything not have an opposition? You did this time because Josh Shapiro leaves no stone unturned in the political process. One of the most effective politicians, campaigners, fundraisers that I've seen in a 40-year career covering Pennsylvania politics. So before we went on the air, I said to Tony Ross, he asked me about that race. I said, Tony, that's been over since May. After Doug Mastriano won the Republican nomination to be the nominee, He is just so unlike Josh Shapiro, so distantly far right of Josh Shapiro, that is not Pennsylvania. Pennsylvania is a purple state. Pennsylvania tends toward moderation. And in my opinion, that race is already settled.
Let me ask you, John. Josh Shapiro has run what was considered maybe a traditional campaign, and Mastriano's run a little bit of different campaign. Maybe you can talk about how the electorate will look at them. I was really surprised. I mean, you've not seen a lot of ads from Mastriano. He's done some rallies. Can you talk about that a little bit?
Yeah, I mean, Mastriano is the most unconventional candidate for governor I've ever seen in this state or any other. He will not talk to the mainstream press. He only talks to far-right radio and print reporters. He will not debate. He has very little money, so he is very limited in what he can do in terms of commercial broadcast ads. The only ad I've seen of his is he and his wife talking about his term of service in the Army as a colonel, which commend him for. Thank you for your service, but you're not running for state soldier. I mean, you're running for governor of the Commonwealth, somebody that's supposed to serve everybody in the Commonwealth, not just a certain block of voters. Shapiro, on the other hand, has run, as Tony, you said, a traditional campaign of gathering support from labor, gathering support from every aspect of Pennsylvania society, including in this case, a lot of Republicans. There's a lot of Republicans who have come out in favor of Josh. Law enforcement. When was the last time you saw a Democratic candidate for governor secure the endorsement of law enforcement over a Republican candidate for governor? Business, Chamber of Commerce annual dinner, biggest convention of business leaders in the state, just held recently. Josh Shapiro talked there. Doug Mastriano skipped it. Never has a Republican candidate for governor not gone to that dinner. Thousands of people attended. It's an opportunity to get your message across to the business community of the entire state. Doug Mastriano opted out of that. Josh Shapiro went, made his peace with that group, said things they want to hear, like further cut in the corporate net income tax, like a loosening of the traditional Democratic opposition to school vouchers. And I suspect picked up a lot more support than any other Democratic candidate for governor in recent history.
And so, John, let me ask you this one last question, John. Richard. John, what does it say that, in spite of everything that you've said, that Mastriano is polling at 44%, in every poll? What does it say about that?
Well, it's Tony, you know what it says. It says there is a chunk of Pennsylvania that is against everything that is established, every institution, everything that has happened politically in the state in terms of against Tom Wolf, against all of the COVID stuff, against, and a lot of pro-life people are in that mix. But I think that's a ceiling. If you're looking for a prediction in that race, we're a split state. We're a split country. I think our state, more than any other, represents where the nation is in terms of ideology, in terms of right and left, red and blue. I mean, we're kind of right there. So, I mean, I look, I don't think it's going to be a blowout, but a 10, 12 point win for Shapiro, that's a big win in a governor's race. I mean, that's a big difference. And I think that's where we're going to end up.
You talked about the dinner that Josh went to, Doug did not. And you and I both know traditionally that has always been more of a Republican spearhead dinner. Yeah. You and I both know that because I've been there and you know that as well. But you see, what Tony just brought up, what amazes me, and I understand the base, and he's got that 40-some%. But this is what troubles me. He has the nerve, and he talks about his military experience, his military pedigree. But yet, he would put on a Confederate uniform and he represents Gettysburg. Now, kind of explain to me what is the logic behind it? This is what I said. He had a Confederate uniform on, but yet he represents Gettysburg. So what does he say to all of those quote, quote, Union soldiers that lost and died on that battlefield?
Yeah, I mean, politically, I think it's fair to call it a misstep. Historically, he taught, as you know, at the U.S. Army War College in Carlisle. He would probably argue, look, this was an opportunity for the faculty to wear any military uniform they chose. He chose a Southern Confederate uniform to wear. He would argue that's part of American history too. That's all I was doing. I wasn't trying to make a statement. It wasn't a dog whistle or anything like that. I understand, Richard, how an awful lot of people, including yourself, might see that as truly, wholly, and completely offensive. I get that. Whether he intended it or not, I don't know the man's soul, but politically, a misstep, no question.
It was a misstep. I guess I was more trouble because he represented Gettysburg.
Yeah.
I think if he had represented Philadelphia or Pittsburgh or something, I might have said, yeah, okay. And I understand the enactment and what people do in an act,
Right.
you know, up there, and I do understand that. And also, I understand he's supposed to be a history buff in terms of history. And there's been some questions about that as well.
There have indeed.
So, you know, I want to throw that out there. But my point is that, and I'm troubled because I know people and they'll say to me, oh, well, he speaks for us. So since he says he speaks for us, I'm telling my audience, we better go to some people who speak for us. And if we don't do that, then shame on us. Because if Doug wins, because we sitting on our little hands thinking, oh, it's a dumb slam. I don't think so.
Yeah.
Don't take anything for granted. Ladies and gentlemen, I'm going to tell you something tonight. Believe me, and we're going to get into it, especially when we get into the U.S. Senate. They want to discourage us from voting. They want us to think it's a slam dunk. And they want us to stay home so that they can sneak in. And as I said earlier, we're going to be in trouble. That's why I think it's very important that we vote. We show up on November 8th. We the people. We are democracy at work. We must not let others steal our right to vote. Not only be heard, but participate because it's guaranteed by the 13th, the 14th, and the 15th Amendment of the Constitution. And as we all know, they throw the Constitution around a lot, especially when it comes to guns. So I'm going to throw it around for voting. So the next time they bring up, they're trying to steal our guns, even though the Constitution doesn't say that, then we should say, why are you trying to keep us from voting? Why are you trying to suppress our voting? And I'll say this again, once again, the Black vote has an opportunity to determine the outcome of the November 8th general election. Let's not be the only people who don't realize our strength. You see, I'm determined, John, that we're going to figure out our strength. And people are going to start respecting us because they take us for granted. I've told the Democrats they take us for granted, and the Republicans don't even attempt to take us for granted because everybody figures we ain't got nowhere to go. If there was a third party, both parties would be in trouble. I mean, a real legitimate party.
Yeah.
And we don't have that now. So what do you think about what I'm saying?
Well, I mean, Richard, you're right. I mean, Pittsburgh, Philadelphia especially has an awful lot of electoral power. And when they use it, Democrats win. And when they stay home for whatever reason, Democrats have a tougher time. So it really is a question of turnout, particularly in the Senate race, which I guess we're going to get to. That could be the sole difference in
Oh,
the
that's
outcome of that race.
okay. That's coming next, and we're gonna deal with that. But I'm gonna leave us with the gubernatorial race based on this. I do understand the T, and those of you in Pennsylvania don't understand the T, and you don't know what I'm talking about. Well, do your research and you'll find out. That's the core of the Republican Party's strength. They're going to come out. It can snow, it can rain, they can have a hurricane, tornado. They're coming out. And if Philadelphia and all the rest of us don't counter with extra votes, we're going down the drain. Would you agree with that, John?
No, not in the governor's race, Richard. I mean, I just don't see it.
Good.
I
Good.
mean,
Good.
I just don't think it's there this year. In any other year, you're absolutely right. That is a very strong, the T is a very strong Republican area, a reliable Republican area. But you can just feel the Mastriano thing kind of slipping away. He and his wife were on social media today talking about how Facebook is blocking their, which seems very unlikely, that when he went on Facebook Live before, he would have thousands of viewers. Now, when he goes on, he only has a couple hundred, and is blaming Facebook for somehow cutting down on the number of people who turn on, which, if you think it through, makes absolutely no sense. If they were cutting him off, he'd have nobody. So it's very hard for me as a political person, a political analyst, to see how he makes inroads. He has made zero attempt to broaden that base of 42%, whatever it is, has made no attempt to expand upon the people that already listen to him. Won't even, thinks every person in the media is against him, won't debate, won't take part in the process. I just don't think that Pennsylvanians, no matter their region, no matter their background, are going to be attracted to him in a way that would make him competitive.
Okay, I'm gonna leave you with this. I agree with you, but my point was, I don't want people to assume that they don't care about the US Senate race. So they just think that the governor gonna win, they don't need to come out. That was my point.
Well, that's a very valid point.
That was my point. My point was, I didn't think the Josh, but I don't want people to say, well, it's over, because it's not over, because, and we're gonna get it right into it now, because hopefully if Josh does as well as the people think he does, hopefully he'll be able to help another candidate out that's running for the US Senate. And we're gonna talk about that. So I'm gonna start out with this here. We're going to the US Senate. And John, you wrote something the other day. Voters need to use some basics to decide the Senate race. What did you mean by that?
Well, I mean, you really need to think through and get beyond. I mean, so far I've criticized this race as just a slugfest between some very well-funded candidates who have spent most of their time saying that the other guy's worse than I am. And there hasn't been a lot of substance in the race. There hasn't been a lot of attention drawn to the most obvious fact in the race, which is, look, if you care about the direction of the country, this race could determine that. So both these candidates are, like all of us, flawed, right? I mean, there's no such thing as a perfect candidate. So when people, either they're turned off by Fetterman's appearance or all the negative ads that have been stacked against him, or they're turned off by Oz's background as a shill for phony meds and a TV celeb. But the bottom line is, if you are a conservative and you have an interest in the direction of the country, you're going to vote for Oz because he could help regain the Senate for Republicans. If you're a Democrat or if you're a person who cares about the direction of the country and you tend to be Democratic in your choices for policy and ideology, you're going to vote for Fetterman no matter what his background is, or no matter how much of what you're hearing about him is true or false, because either one of them could be the balance of control of the Senate. So that race is extremely important. And I was trying in that piece, Richard, to encourage voters to think about the basics, like really, what do you want in terms of leadership in the country and in the state? And let's try to judge these people on what they've done, what they've said, what they say they will do, their character, their level of integrity, and make the choice on that, not on the basis of repetitive, annoying attack ads that are on television nonstop and will be between now and election day.
Tony?
Yeah, John, how important do you see the upcoming debate, which is going to be on Channel 27 here in Harrisburg? As you said in your piece just a few minutes ago, you've got, Oz is a dog killer. Fetterman lives off his parents. How do you see the debate being important in this race as opposed to other ones that the debates maybe don't have as much influence?
Yeah, I think it's a critical debate for a couple of reasons. And I actually think it'll get viewership. Debates, everybody says, look, debates are just, the press are the only people interested in debates. Nobody wants to watch debates. Nobody cares about debates. I think this one might get viewership because it has a couple of oddities. First of all, it's very late in the game. It's next Tuesday, Tony, as you said, only 2 weeks from election day. Secondly, it has the oddity of Fetterman will be accommodated with a large screen to have everything that's spoken captioned so he can read it, because one of the side effects of his stroke has left him with limited ability to quickly pick up auditory sounds, to quickly hear what people are saying and make sense of it. So, I mean, I immediately, as a veteran, and Richard, you probably think the same thing, is I'm figuring Oz will talk as fast as he possibly can just to fill up that screen so that it takes Fetterman longer to read it. And people say, well, what's wrong with that guy? He can't think on his feet. But I think that, and look, these are two very unconventional candidates. And I think that brings a lot of national interest. News Nation, the relatively new subscriber network that Cuomo Jr., what's Mario's brother?
Chris
Chris,
Cuomo.
yeah, that Chris Cuomo anchors. News Nation is carrying it nationwide. I would not be surprised if C-SPAN picks it up. I wouldn't be surprised if large chunks of it end up, because there's a lot of national interest in this race. And it's going to be, the two things that strike me most are Fetterman is not a good debater, but there probably are people out there who will be empathetic towards him because of the way he's fighting through the effects of this stroke. I mean, still campaigning, still doing interviews, still debating. And the bar will be set so low for him because people expect him to falter, that if he can just get through the hour, that could really accrue to his advantage. On the other side, Mehmet Oz, Dr. Oz, for close to 13 years, had a daily television show that he hosted, the Dr. Oz show. He's a polished, practiced, on-camera celebrity who is smooth as silk. His performance will be right at the top of his game, and that contrast is going to be startling to people, and it's going to be a challenge for people to actually listen to what is said. Fetterman has to address some of these attacks against him, but Oz has a problem with, he's changed his position on a number of things. He's not from here, as Fetterman has pounded over and over. And he has that background of being a shill for what is basically phony medicine for all kinds of ailments. And he's a celebrated physician. I mean, why would somebody who is a world-class physician, he actually holds patents on heart devices to help through surgery and post-surgery. Why would somebody of that intellectual capability go on and shill for phony meds? And you know the answer is money. So hopefully that comes across in some way where somebody says, look, Here's a guy who lived off his parents. My answer to that, Fetterman, as mayor of Braddock, making $150 a year, his family supported him so he could do that. My answer to that is, if you want to do that and you live in a family that is sufficiently economically well off to allow that to happen, what you're doing is at least trying to help people somewhere, in this case, in Braddock. That's been used against them. That's been weaponized against Fetterman. When, I mean, how many people do you come across in life, and especially in politics, who actually want to help people on the ground, not talking, not giving speeches, but working in the community? He did that, for good or ill, for success or no. He tried, and that's been used against him. I don't think that's fair. I blame his campaign for not getting that message across.
Okay. Political strategist understands that people don't vote for, they vote against. The average psychology of campaigning is to get 51% of electorals to vote against the opposition. Obviously, attack ads target specific groups, and the race card is one of them. Oz is playing the race card with this whole Willie Horton kind of situation. Nobody, those of you out there, think about the Dukakis, think about Mark Single. Their playbook has always been to scare the suburban voter about crime. And it's so obvious. John, we're tired of it. We all know it happens. That's, my big issue is you're not really trying to get my vote. You're either trying to suppress my vote, and you're trying to scare the other people from not voting for. What do you think about that?
Well, Richard, you know, and I know it works. So Oz is doing it. Other Republicans across the country are doing it. The whole crime thing is red hot. There was a poll, the Siena poll out of New York today, in that governor's race, which is relatively close. The number one issue New York state voters identified was crime. Republicans are fortunate that crime has been up during and after the pandemic. And you're right, that's what they do. They go to an old playbook. It's been around for decades. And yes, suburban voters are very important in big states, including Pennsylvania. And you throw the crime stuff out, throw some pictures of Philadelphia, throw some stats from Philadelphia, and try to scare people into voting Republican. When, in fact, I mean, just the notion that Dr. Oz is a crime fighter is, I don't know. It's hard for me to see that. But so you don't really see him in those ads. I mean, it's just scary photos and crime stats and all of that. And it's working. Since he tried for a month, from mid-September to mid-October, his unfavorable rate came up. Fetterman's unfavorable rate, his unfavorable rate went down. Fetterman's unfavorable rate went up. And it was solely because of all of the crime stuff that he was running in television ads. So it's effective, and they're going to keep doing it.
Well, before I let Tony come on, I'm going to say this. It's sickening that we talk about crime. We talk about the Republican Party being so tough on crime. And now all of these things that's going on, you got people that's been convicted. You got people who's going through the judicial system, found guilty. And yet the Republicans are turning their eyes to it. So they've been talking crime all this time. And I'm telling you, Democrats and everybody else, it's time to make them accountable, because they've been hypocrites. All this time you've been talking about crime. But at the same time, all these people that got sentenced, they got pardoned. All of a sudden now you talk about the FBI is crooked, which Black folks has always known the FBI has been crooked. You always talked about the judicial system being fair. Black folks ain't never thought it was fair, but now because it's on the other side, it's not fair. And people need to understand what that tells us. That tells us that this is what it tells us. And you can see I'm upset. It tells us that crime. There's a lot of crime. Don't think there's just crime in the Black community. There's just crime all over, but it doesn't get reported. And that's why we better start getting our own TV stations, radio stations, and newspapers to tell our own story. Because if we're waiting on us to tell our story, we can do it. But if we wait for somebody else to do it, that's crazy. You just use crime. And nobody ain't talking about all these crimes that are happening. People stealing all kinds of stuff. People stealing all kinds of money. People doing all kinds of things. But the crazy part, they've been indicted and been sentenced based on the judicial system that we all say that is blind and nobody can see. Tony, your comments.
I think you're right on point about that. I wanted to ask John a quick question. Dr. Oz, in his case, got into some trouble, I guess, a few weeks ago, where he brought a woman onto a certain event he had, and I think it was in Germantown section of Philadelphia, Black woman who was a mother of a murdered victim, but in fact, she turned out that she, in addition to being a murder victim, her son being a murder victim, she was working for the Oz campaign. In Fetterman's case, he's had a long issue with the black resident that he apparently pointed a gun at.
Yeah.
So I'm asking you, so I'm a Black voter, and I'm saying, well, what are you specifically going to do to improve my life? Or, so can you talk a little bit about what are they going to do about that, as opposed to just talking about these wild things that I just talked about?
Yeah. Tony, that sets me up for something I wanted to read to you guys that I came across quite accidentally. And it goes directly to your question. And the question is, what are you going to do about our lives? Right?
Right.
I mean, it's not this person did this or this person did that. Those are isolated incidents. We're talking about the big picture, the whole lives. I came across this, and it's from the 1980 presidential debate 42 years ago between Reagan and Carter. And William Hilliard, who was an African-American reporter for the Portland, Oregon, asked this question. Keep in mind, 42 years ago, the decline of our cities has been hastened by the continual rise of crime, strained race relations, a fall in the quality of public education, persistence of abnormal poverty in a rich nation, and a decline in services to the public. The signs seem to point to a deterioration that could lead to the establishment of a permanent underclass in the cities. What specifically would you do in the next 4 years to reverse that trend? That question 42 years ago, Tony, you just asked it today, because how much has changed? And in their answers, Reagan talked about local development zones, tax incentives, create businesses to provide jobs and give property tax breaks, which is exactly what Republicans would say today if they were asked the question 42 years later. Carter said, well, we've had some successful urban renewal projects, and we need more for housing, for transit, for education, and we need to invest more in those programs, which is exactly what Democrats are doing 42 years later. But how much has changed? How many problems in cities have been solved in 42 years? So when you ask me, Tony, what would I say to an urban community of any color? Why would you have any reason to believe what anybody tells you? Because virtually we are where we were. And until there is a concentrated effort to change that with not this stuff about Fetterman ran down a black man with a shotgun. Oz brought somebody from his own campaign and tried to shill her off as not the, what specifically are you going to do to make my city better? And that's the answer I want to hear.
Tony, go ahead. You want to follow that up?
Oh, I think you're absolutely right, Richard. I think as I talk to people around the state, there's a real hunger for as you put it, details. And I think I would criticize both campaigns for a lack of details. I understand that in campaigns, as we know, all three of us know, they just go with what works. But I think the details are what they really need to work on, because it's really bad.
Yet my fear in this cycle is that all this negative stuff and incremental stuff and focusing on little isolated things, Richard, will turn people off.
Yeah.
I spent the weekend in Pittsburgh. I saw no evidence of a campaign, no signs on the turnpike, no signs in the city, no billboards in the city. The only television commercials I saw out there were commercials for that Connor Lamb seat, which is open and which is very competitive. So I'm just afraid that given the quality of our candidates in one race and the absence of a campaign in another race, that people might just say, what's the point?
Let me ask you this, John. Excuse me, Richard. Do you think the race will be more of a nationalized race about who controls the Senate, or will it be decided by Pennsylvania issues?
I think it'll be nationalized, don't you?
Yeah, I think a lot of people feel that way, but I was wondering, what do you think?
Yeah, I think it will, because I don't think enough people pay attention to sort of the local or state issues, but everybody has a pretty good sense of the national issues.
I think that drives my point, is that voter suppression, Black voter suppression, giving us no reason to vote. And if you keep sending those kind of messages out, no reason to vote, so that means that's one of the number one playbooks for the Republicans, is to say, you know what, let them not be interested in voting, because the Republicans have not done anything to try to win over African Americans or people of color in general to join their party.
Well, Richard, let me ask you and Tony, what is your sense of what Democrats have done to bring out the African-American vote this cycle? Not only the African-American vote, all the minority votes, all the urban votes. What have Democrats done specifically to bring out that vote?
I'll respond first. They've done a terrible job. And not only they've done a terrible job, but whoa, let's go back. How many times on this program, John, I have not said and suggested to the Democratic Party, you got to do a better job. I keep telling everybody, you can't keep three things you can't do. You can't take people of color for granted. And two, you got to do something to make me want to support you. And it bothers me that I'm on this air tonight telling everybody that this midterm is a very critical election. And didn't I say that 2 years ago for the presidential? I said the same thing. It's very important. It's a critical election. So my thing is, they've done a terrible job. And they want us to bail them out as always.
Well, Tony, do you agree, Tony? And what could they do
Well,
better?
I would agree. I think mostly I've seen what I call the month out strategy. You know, now it's a month before election, so here they come around, they're waving and they're kissing babies, and I agree with Richard. You know, they should have been out there at the beginning of the summer, or even beforehand, cultivating the vote. So now, now they're coming out and trying to push it in the last month, but I think might be too late.
I mean, I hope not, because we got so much at risk. That's the reason why I'm so adamant about us coming out to vote, because I see what's at stake. I see that if the Senate is taken over by the R's and the House is taken over by the R's, we're in trouble. Nothing is not going to get done. Not to say a whole lot has been done. We've already seen it. My whole platform on this whole thing is for us to come out, to show ourselves, and next time from now on tell people we're very important and don't you ever disrespect us again. You disrespected us all this time. And so I'm saying I want us, people of color, to sit at the table. But as we sit at the table, we bring substance to the table and not a handout begging. And they always think we always want to beg. And I'm tired of begging. And I'm saying, you want our vote, you're going to start giving us what we need, or else maybe it will be, it's already bad. You know, my attitude, John, is very serious. I'm an old guy. I look at Ronald Reagan's and I've been around a long time. And probably it's not really for me, it's for the people down the road. And I'm going to leave with this and I'm going to let you both talk. If you don't vote your vested interest, then shame on you. I'm tired. Ladies, if you don't vet your vested interest, shame on you. Hispanics, you don't, or people of color, whoever. Vested interest, that's what it's about, vested interest. So if you don't want to vote what you believe, then don't be saying, woe me. That's how I'm going to leave it tonight. Look at yourself in the mirror, and if you don't look out for yourself, then shame on you. Tony, and then we're going to let John have the final say.
I agree. And I would also say, we have done a very poor job in really putting together a coherent strategy, with what's going on with abortion rights. Trump, number two, you want to get Democrats motivated, talk about Trump. I haven't heard much talked about Trump one way or the other. So I think that those are all very important issues, and I hope that the Democrats can do better than what they appear to be doing so far.
Well, guys, I would just say that there's never been an election cycle like this in Pennsylvania history. Every single state house seat is different. Every single congressional seat is different. You have an open U.S. Senate seat and an open governor's race. That's never happened in the state's history. And if you want to get some energy going, you should just remind people the results of this election at every level are going to have an impact on 2024. And you know who's waiting in the wings to run again in 2024.
That's very true. I want to thank my guest coming on. I thought this was a very important thing for us to discuss. And I thought it was even better for Tony and I, to shape our narrative to how we perceive things. And ladies and gentlemen, you can sit in your rocking chair or sit and feel. It's not important. But those of you keep this in mind. It's not always about you. It's about the next generation and the next generation. And if I can leave you with this, think about the Supreme Court. That should make you understand.
Right.
The Republicans has always played the long ball, long game. The Democrats is always short game. And guess what? The short game is not worth anything. It's the long game. So hopefully all of you will decide that this is important. And I'm asking you to go out to vote to show our strength so that we can go to the table and tell people you will never underestimate us, and you won't do voter suppression, and you won't run ads. It's really embarrassing to us. And I don't like it. Don't try to make me think all Black folks in the community are criminals and crime is running rampant. And if you let this person, that means they're going to run to the suburban area. That's been their playbook for all those years, John and me. John, we know that's their playbook. They haven't even changed it. And I'm glad that you brought up, to put it in perspective, when you said about Ronald Reagan and Jimmy Carter 42 years ago of what they said and where we are today. And I'm going to leave the audience with what you said 42 years ago and where we are today. Thank you, audience, for tuning in. And John, you have anything else to say before we roll?
Always good to be with you guys. Thank you for having me.
Glad. Tony's always a pleasure.
Sure.
Audience, I'm sure you all aware that all three of us are friends and we know each other and we all involved in politics. So those of you out there who says, do we know what we're talking about? You can take this to the bank. I know we know what we're talking about. Have a good evening. And don't forget, elections coming up in November, so don't find no excuses. You guys still got time to register to vote. You got time to get a ballot, absentee, so you still got time. So, and those of you who have not registered to vote, make sure that you take all your ID. Because if you don't have the ID, they ain't letting you register. Okay? Voter suppression is out there. It's alive. It's not what you hear, it's alive. So thank you. Thank you again, audience. Like I said, it's on you. And if we don't do what we're supposed to do, then shame on us. Thank you and good evening.
Good evening.
Thank you for joining the Richard Utley Show on the Voice 17104. We will be here on the Voice 17104 every first and third Tuesday from 6:30 p.m. to 7:30 p.m. Once again, thanks for viewing. Remember to visit us on Facebook at Richard Utley, and we welcome your questions,